The rain poured down like it would never stop. Sophia wiped her tired eyes and checked her watch again. Another bus missed. Another 30 minutes to wait. Her scrubs still carried the faint smell of hospital disinfectant after her 14-hour shift, and her feet throbbed inside her worn-out white shoes. 3 years working as a nurse at Metropolitan General Hospital, and days like today still broke her heart. The little boy with pneumonia. The old woman who came in alone after a fall. Sometimes Sophia wondered if she was making any difference at all in this overcrowded city hospital. She dug through her purse for her phone to text her younger sister Lisa, "Going to be late. Save me some dinner." Lisa was in her second year of college, and Sophia had promised their mom before she passed that she'd make sure Lisa finished school no matter what. Between rent, Lisa's books, and her own mountain of student loans, Sophia's paychecks disappeared almost as soon as they arrived. A car horn beeped softly nearby. Sophia ignored it, used to the constant noise of downtown. It beeped again, more insistent this time. She looked up to see a shiny black Bentley pulled alongside the curb, its window rolling down smoothly. "Nurse Bennett, you're getting soaked out here." Sophia squinted through the rain at the familiar face. Dr. Alexander Carter, the brilliant neurosurgeon whose picture hung in the hospital lobby next to the sign for the new Carter wing. The doctor whose foundation had donated millions to children's medical research. The man whose arrival at the hospital always created a buzz of excitement and nervousness among the staff. Yes, just waiting for the bus, Dr. Carter. It's fine." Sophia tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how she must look after her double shift. "I'm heading downtown. Please, let me give you a ride." His voice was surprisingly gentle, not at all like the commanding tone she'd heard him use in hospital meetings. Sophia hesitated. She barely knew him beyond professional nods in the hallway. Still, the thought of waiting another half hour in this downpour. "That's really nice of you, but—" A crack of thunder cut her off as the rain suddenly doubled in intensity. Dr. Carter pushed open the door. "Please, consider it a thank you for your work with Mrs. Rodriguez last week. Your quick thinking made my job much easier." Surprised he'd even noticed, Sophia slid into the warm, dry car, her wet clothes immediately dampening the soft leather seat. "I'm sorry about your seats," she mumbled, embarrassed. "They'll dry," he said simply, nodding to his driver to continue. The inside of the car smelled like expensive cologne and leather. Sophia sat stiffly, unsure what to say to this man whose watch probably cost more than her yearly rent. "Where to?" he asked. She gave her address in the unfashionable East Side, trying not to feel self-conscious. As the car moved smoothly through traffic, Dr. Carter surprised her by asking about Mrs. Rodriguez's recovery. Then about the new emergency room protocols. He listened intently to her answers, asking follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. By the time they'd pulled up to her apartment building, they were deep in conversation about patient care approaches, and Sophia had almost forgotten who she was talking to. Almost. "Thank you for the ride, Dr. Carter," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Alex," he corrected with a small smile. "And you're welcome, Sophia." As she hurried through the rain to her building's entrance, Sophia never imagined that this simple act of kindness was the beginning of something that would completely change her life's direction. She couldn't know that in just 24 hours, she would receive a phone call that would lead to 3 days that would shatter everything she thought she knew about wealth, purpose, and her own potential. She just knew she was finally home, and for once, not soaking wet from the bus stop. Sophia woke up to the shrill ring of her phone. She fumbled for it on her nightstand, knocking over a half-empty glass of water in the process. "Hello." Her voice was still thick with sleep. "Is this Sophia Bennett?" The woman on the other end sounded crisp and professional. "Yes, that's me." Sophia sat up, suddenly alert. Unknown numbers calling this early rarely brought good news. "This is Grace Chen, Dr. Carter's assistant. Dr. Carter asked me to contact you regarding an urgent professional matter. Are you available to speak with him?" Sophia's heart skipped. Had she done something wrong during their conversation last night? Said something stupid? Her mind raced through their interaction in the car. Yes, of course. There was a brief pause, and then Dr. Carter's deep voice came through the line. "Sophia, I apologize for the early call, but I have a situation I'm hoping you might help with." Sophia glanced at her cheap plastic alarm clock. Her shift didn't start until 3 p.m. No problem, Dr. Carter. Please call me Alex, he reminded her. I'm organizing a 3-day medical mission to Pine Ridge, a small town about 5 hours from here. We're bringing medical care to people who can't easily access it. Our head nurse has come down with the flu, and we're leaving in 4 hours. Sophia sat up straighter. And you need a replacement? Exactly. I know it's incredibly short notice, but after working with you yesterday with Mrs. Rodriguez and seeing your work around the hospital, I believe you'd be perfect for this. Sophia's mind whirled. A 3-day trip? With Dr. Carter, Alex? Her thoughts immediately went to Lisa, to the bills due next week, to her upcoming shifts. As if reading her mind, he continued, I understand this is unexpected. You'd be fully compensated, of course. The pay for these 3 days would be equivalent to about 2 months of your current nursing salary. Sophia nearly dropped the phone. 2 months' salary? That would cover her next student loan payment with enough left over to finally fix Lisa's laptop. Are you sure you want me? She asked, still stunned. There must be more qualified nurses at the hospital. There was a pause. Honestly, Sophia, I've observed your work for some time now. The way you handled that multi-car accident victims last month was exceptional. You're skilled, quick thinking, and most importantly, you truly care about your patients. That's exactly what we need for this mission. He'd been watching her work. Sophia felt a blend of surprise and flattery. The helicopter leaves at noon from Memorial Park. We'll return Friday evening. All equipment and supplies are being arranged. You would just need to pack personal items for 3 days. Helicopter. The word had hum in her mind. She'd never even been on a plane. Can I think about it for a few minutes? She asked, already mentally calculating what shifts she'd need to swap and who might cover for her. Of course. I'll need to know within the hour, though, so we can find someone else if needed. After they hung up, Sophia called her nursing supervisor, who seemed surprisingly unsurprised by the request. Dr. Carter actually called me last night to ask if we could spare you, her supervisor explained. I've already arranged coverage for your shifts. This is a great opportunity, Sophia. His medical missions do amazing work. Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, stunned. Her next thought was Lisa, but when she called her sister, Lisa practically squealed with excitement. Are you kidding? Working with Dr. Carter, the billionaire doctor who's always in the news for his charity work? You have to go. But I'll be gone for 3 days, Sophia protested. I'm 20 years old, not 12, Lisa laughed. I can microwave my own dinners for 3 days. Besides, you said it pays really well. Extremely well, Sophia admitted. Then what are you even calling me for? Say yes. 45 minutes after the initial call, Sophia found herself packing a small bag with shaking hands. What did you pack for a medical mission with a billionaire? She threw in basic clothes, toiletries, and her most comfortable pair of nursing shoes. At 11:30, a sleek black car, not the Bentley from yesterday, but equally expensive looking, pulled up outside her apartment building. The driver, a friendly older man named Raymond, helped her with her bag. First time working with Dr. Carter? He asked as they drove toward Memorial Park. Is it that obvious? Sophia asked. Raymond chuckled. You've got that look. Don't worry. He seems intimidating because of who he is, but you'll see. He's different when he's doing this kind of work. Been driving for him for 15 years, seen it all. As they approached the park, Sophia spotted the helicopter waiting on the open field, its blades still. Standing beside it, checking something on a tablet, was Dr. Carter. He looked different today, less formal in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but somehow still carrying that aura of authority. Her stomach fluttered with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. 3 days working closely with one of the most renowned doctors in the country. 3 days that would pay more than 60 days of her regular work. 3 days that she couldn't possibly imagine would completely change how she saw the world. And herself. Ready? Raymond asked as he parked. Sophia took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. The helicopter blades whirred overhead, creating a deafening roar that made conversation impossible. Sophia gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles white, as they lifted off the ground. She'd never been in a helicopter before, never even been on a plane, and the swooping sensation in her stomach made her regret the hasty breakfast she'd gulped down. Across from her sat Dr. Carter, Alex, looking completely at ease as he reviewed medical files on a tablet. He glanced up, caught her eye, and seemed to notice her discomfort. Without a word, he reached into a compartment and handed her a bottle of water and what looked like a mint. "Ginger candy," he mouthed over the noise, making a motion suggesting it would help with the queasiness. Sophia nodded gratefully and popped it into her mouth. The spicy sweet taste spread across her tongue, and surprisingly, her stomach began to settle. They flew over the sprawling city, which gradually gave way to suburbs, then farmland, and finally, dense forests broken only by the occasional small town or winding road. Sophia's nervousness about the flight eventually transformed into wonder at the view. After about an hour, Dr. Carter handed her a headset. "Better for talking," his voice came through clearly now. "How are you doing?" "Better, thank you," she replied. "This view is amazing." He nodded. "First helicopter ride?" "First time flying, period." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Really? Well, you're handling it like a pro." There was an awkward silence. Sophia had a million questions, but wasn't sure what was appropriate to ask someone like him. How did you make casual conversation with a billionaire? To her surprise, he broke the silence. "I should brief you on what to expect. Pine Ridge has about 2,000 residents, but our clinic will serve people from the surrounding counties too. Many haven't seen a doctor in years." Years? Sophia couldn't imagine it. Even with her tight budget, she at least had the hospital's staff clinic for basic care. The nearest hospital is over 90 minutes away, and many don't have reliable transportation or can't take time off work. The local clinic closed 2 years ago when their only doctor retired. His expression darkened. It's a healthcare desert, and unfortunately, it's not unusual in rural areas. As he walked her through the types of cases they might see: untreated chronic conditions, delayed diagnosis, preventable complications, Sophia began to understand why someone like him would fly into the middle of nowhere instead of working in his state-of-the-art hospital. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly, then immediately regretted the bluntness of her question. Dr. Carter didn't seem offended. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Medicine should be about healing people, not just those who can afford to be healed," he finally said, his voice soft but clear through the headset. "My skills don't belong exclusively to those who can pay top dollar for them." Before she could respond, the pilot announced they were beginning their descent. The landing site was a cleared field beside a small community center. As the helicopter touched down, Sophia was shocked to see at least 50 people already waiting, some in chairs, others standing, many with children. "They knew we were coming?" she asked. Dr. Carter nodded. "Word spreads fast. We sent advance notice, but I bet everyone within 30 miles knows by now." He glanced at his watch. "And we're setting up immediately. Ready?" The next few hours passed in a blur. The community center had been transformed into a makeshift clinic, with portable dividers creating exam rooms. Dr. Carter worked with an efficiency that amazed her, moving from patient to patient with the same care and attention he would give to wealthy clients at his private practice. Sophia quickly fell into her role, taking vitals, updating records, and assisting with exams. By mid-afternoon, they had already seen over 30 patients, many with conditions that made her heart ache: untreated diabetes, advanced arthritis, children with asthma whose families couldn't afford inhalers. Around 4 o'clock, a commotion at the entrance caught her attention. A frantic mother carried in a boy who looked about 7 years old. The child's movements were jerky, uncoordinated, and his speech was slurred. "He's been getting worse for months," the mother explained, tears streaming down her face. 3 doctors said it was just growing pains or attention-seeking behavior. But he's falling all the time now, and yesterday he couldn't remember his sister's name. Dr. Carter's demeanor changed instantly. The efficient but warm physician became intensely focused. He performed a detailed neurological exam, asking the boy to follow his finger with his eyes, testing reflexes, watching his gait. "How long has his left eye been drifting like that?" he asked the mother. "About 2 weeks," she whispered. "The school nurse said maybe he needs glasses." Dr. Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He pulled Sophia aside. "I believe he has a brainstem glioma. A type of tumor pressing on his brainstem, he said quietly. It's been misdiagnosed repeatedly. We need advanced imaging immediately. Sophia's stomach dropped. But the nearest hospital equipment is too far, he finished. He pulled out his phone and walked a few steps away, speaking intensely. When he returned, his face was set with determination. I've arranged a video consultation with 3 neurological specialists. We're setting it up now. He looked at his watch again. And I've called in some equipment. It will be here in 2 hours. Sophia stared at him. You're flying in medical equipment? For one patient. Dr. Carter met her gaze steadily. What would you have me do? Tell them to drive 3 hours for care they probably can't afford. This child doesn't have time to wait. The rest of the evening, Sophia watched as Dr. Carter coordinated a team of remote specialists, arranged for emergency transportation, and personally explained every step to the terrified parents. He didn't leave until nearly midnight when they finally had a treatment plan in place. As they walked back to their accommodations, modest rooms above the local diner, Sophia realized that everything she thought she knew about Dr. Alexander Carter, billionaire physician, was only the glossy surface of a much deeper man. Sophia woke to the smell of fresh coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was, not in her tiny apartment, but in the small room above the diner in Pine Ridge. Sunlight streamed through thin curtains as she checked her phone. 6:13 a.m. She'd slept less than 5 hours, but strangely, she felt rested. Throwing on clothes, she headed downstairs to find Dr. Carter already seated at a corner table, surrounded by papers and his ever-present tablet. The diner was otherwise empty except for a cook visible through the kitchen window. Morning, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. You're up early. He pushed a mug toward her. Figured you'd need this. We have another long day ahead. The coffee was hot and strong, exactly what she needed. As she sipped, she noticed dark circles under his eyes. Did you sleep at all? She asked. A few hours. He ran a hand through his hair, which was slightly rumpled, the first time she'd seen him looking anything less than perfectly put together. I was following up on Michael, the boy from yesterday. They got him to the children's hospital in time. He's scheduled for surgery this afternoon. Sophia felt a wave of relief. So he'll be okay. Better chances now. If we'd waited, he didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, appeared with plates of eggs, bacon, and toast. Eat up, she said, sliding the plates in front of them. May says it's on the house for the doctor and nurse who looked at her grandson's asthma yesterday. After she left, Sophia raised an eyebrow. You didn't tell me you weren't charging people. We're not. He took a bite of toast. The foundation covers everything. Your foundation? He nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. It seemed the simplest solution. Before she could ask more questions, his phone rang. The conversation was brief but clearly concerning. We need to head out now, he said, dropping cash on the table despite the free meal. Word has spread even further. There's already a line forming, and some have been waiting since 4 a.m. The scene at the community center was overwhelming. At least 70 people stood in a line that wrapped around the building. Elderly folks in lawn chairs, mothers with fussy babies, men who looked like they'd come straight from night shifts, all waiting patiently in the cool morning air. Inside, their small team of 4, Dr. Carter, Sophia, a local retired nurse named Patty, and a paramedic volunteer named Joe, quickly set up for the day. They'd worked efficiently, but by noon, they'd seen only 28 patients, with dozens still waiting. We're running low on antibiotics and asthma medications, Sophia reported during a quick lunch break. They'd been giving out medications directly to patients who couldn't afford pharmacy visits. Dr. Carter frowned. And the testing supplies for diabetes. Should we start turning people away? Patty asked hesitantly. Tell them to come back tomorrow. Dr. Carter glanced out the window at the growing line. Many had been waiting for hours now. He pulled out his phone and stepped away. 15 minutes later, he returned. Help is coming. We just need to hold out for another 3 hours. Sure enough, around 3 p.m., the distinctive sound of helicopter blades cut through the air. But instead of landing in their usual spot, it hovered over the field behind the community center and began lowering large crates on cables. What on earth? Sophia watched in amazement. Supplies, Dr. Carter said simply. and reinforcements. The helicopter landed and 2 people emerged, a young doctor and a nurse practitioner, both carrying medical bags. "Your team?" Sophia asked. "Friends who owed me favors," he replied with a small smile. With the additional help and supplies, they worked well into the evening. Around 8 p.m., as they were treating the last few patients, a summer storm hit, the kind that brings sudden, violent thunder and knocks out power. The community center went dark, emergency lights flickering on but providing minimal illumination. In the middle of taking an elderly man's blood pressure, Sophia froze. "Flashlights," Joe called, tossing them around. Just then, commotion erupted at the entrance. 2 men carried in a woman who was clutching her chest, her face contorted in pain. "My mom." A teenage boy followed, panicked. "She just collapsed. She can't breathe." In the dim emergency lighting, Dr. Carter directed them to lay her on the exam table. "Possible heart attack," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Sophia, I need you." Working by flashlight in the darkened room, they stabilized the woman. Dr. Carter's hands moved with practiced precision as he administered medication and monitored her vitals. When her condition stabilized enough for transport, he arranged for an emergency airlift to the nearest cardiac center. After the helicopter left with the patient, Sophia found Dr. Carter sitting alone in the break room, his flashlight pointing at the ceiling to create ambient light. The power was still out, and the center was finally quiet. "That was incredible," she said, sitting beside him. "How did you stay so calm?" He stared at the circle of light on the ceiling. "I've worked in worse conditions." Before all this, he gestured vaguely, perhaps referring to his wealth, his status. "I worked in disaster zones with Doctors Without Borders." "Really?" Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. He nodded, then fell silent. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "My mother died from a heart attack when I was 15. We lived in a neighborhood with no nearby hospital. By the time the ambulance arrived, he trailed off. She might have survived with proper care." Sophia sat in stunned silence. This wasn't information you could find in his hospital bio or the magazine profiles about his charitable foundation. "Is that why you became a doctor?" "One of the reasons," he said, "and why I built hospitals in underserved areas. And why we're here." He looked directly at her. "Everyone deserves care, Sophia, not just those who can afford it." In the dim light, with his guard down, he didn't look like a billionaire doctor. He looked like someone who understood loss and had decided to do something about it. The final day of the medical mission dawned bright and clear. The power had been restored overnight, and Sophia felt a strange mix of emotions as she helped set up the clinic for their last day. Part of her was exhausted. They'd seen over 100 patients in 2 days, but another part felt oddly sad that tomorrow she'd be back in her normal life, working regular shifts at the hospital. "Ready for our last day?" Dr. Carter asked, joining her at the supply table. He brought coffee for both of them, now a morning ritual. "Mixed feelings," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "It's been intense, but also, I don't know, rewarding in a different way." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why I keep doing this. The connection to why we all became healthcare workers in the first place." The morning passed quickly with the usual stream of patients, ear infections, blood pressure checks, prenatal visits. Around midday, they took a short break while Putty and Joe covered the front desk. "Any word on the woman with the heart attack?" Sophia asked, unwrapping a sandwich one of the local families had brought for the medical team. "Stable," Dr. Carter replied. "They put in 2 stents. Her son called to thank us this morning." Sophia smiled, but noticed Dr. Carter seemed distracted. "Everything okay?" Before he could answer, Putty stuck her head in. "Dr. Carter, we have a 16-year-old girl. Her parents drove 2 hours to get here. They're pretty worried." The girl, Lily, sat nervously on the exam table, her parents hovering nearby. She was thin, pale, with a yellowish tint to her skin. As soon as Dr. Carter entered, her father stepped forward. "She's been sick on and off for months. Fevers, headaches, always tired. The doctor in Brighton said it was just teenage stuff, maybe stress from school, but she's getting worse." Sophia watched Dr. Carter's face as he listened to the symptoms. Something changed in his expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight set to his jaw. "How long has the yellow tint been present?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "About 2 weeks," Lily's mother answered. "And she's lost weight. 10 pounds in a month, and she was already small." Dr. Carter performed a thorough examination, his movements methodical but gentle. When he pressed on her abdomen, the girl winced. "I'd like to run some blood tests," he said finally, "and an ultrasound." Sophia helped collect the blood samples while Dr. Carter stepped out to make a call. When he returned, he brought in the portable ultrasound machine they'd been using for prenatal checks. As he moved the wand over Lily's abdomen, Sophia could see his face grow more serious. He pointed out something on the screen to her, an abnormal mass near the liver, then continued the exam without alarming the family. "I'll need to consult with a colleague," he told them. "Can you wait about 30 minutes?" In the break room, he pulled up the images on his tablet. "It could be several things, but my concern is pancreatic cancer." Sophia felt her heart sink. "But she's only 16. It's rare but not impossible at her age." He ran a hand through his hair. "The symptoms match what my wife experienced." Sophia blinked, surprised. This was the first mention of a wife. Seeing her expression, he added quietly, "Catherine died 6 years ago. She was 32. By the time they diagnosed it correctly, it was too late." "I'm so sorry," Sophia said softly. He nodded, his focus already back on the images. "That's why we need to move quickly here. I'm not letting this girl fall through the cracks of the healthcare system." For the next hour, Sophia watched as Dr. Carter coordinated a virtual team of specialists, an oncologist, a radiologist, and a surgeon, all examining the images and test results remotely. He spoke with a directness that somehow managed to be both authoritative and compassionate as he explained the situation to Lily's parents. "We can't be certain without more advanced testing, but there's a mass that needs immediate attention," he told them. "I've arranged for Lily to be seen tomorrow morning at the University Medical Center. All the costs will be covered." The father's face crumpled with worry and relief. "We can't possibly afford." "It's taken care of," Dr. Carter said firmly. "My foundation handles these cases. All you need to focus on is getting Lily the care she needs." After giving them detailed instructions and his personal phone number, he watched them leave, the girl looking small and frightened between her parents. When they were gone, Sophia touched his arm gently. "If it is cancer, then she'll have the best treatment available," he said with quiet determination, "and a fighting chance." They worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon, but Sophia could sense Lily's case had affected him deeply. As they packed up supplies, the last patient finally seen, she found herself wanting to say something, anything, to ease the weight she could see he was carrying. "You made a difference for her today," she said finally. "Whatever happens next, you gave her a chance." He paused, looking at her directly. "We did. I couldn't have managed this clinic without you." After a moment, he added, "Catherine would have liked you. She always said the true measure of a healthcare worker wasn't their credentials, but their capacity for compassion." In that moment, Sophia realized Dr. Alexander Carter wasn't just sharing a professional compliment. He was sharing something deeply personal, a piece of his heart that he usually kept hidden behind his professional demeanor. "I would have liked to meet her," Sophia said simply. As they finished packing in comfortable silence, Sophia understood that the man beside her was far more complex than the billionaire doctor label that had initially defined him in her mind. He was someone who had known profound loss and had channeled it into purpose, using his wealth not as a shield from the world's pain, but as a tool to heal it. The helicopter ride back to the city felt different somehow. Sophia sat quietly, watching the landscape change from dense forests back to farmland, then suburbs, and finally the familiar city skyline. 3 days ago, she'd been terrified of flying. Now, she barely noticed the height or the movement. "Penny, for your thoughts," Dr. Carter said through the headset. Sophia smiled. "Just thinking about how much has happened in 3 days, it feels like we've been gone much longer." He nodded. "That tends to happen when you step outside your normal life." As the city grew closer, Sophia felt a strange sense of displacement. The buildings, the traffic, the hurried pace visible even from the air. It all seemed somehow foreign now, though she'd lived here her entire life. When they landed at Memorial Park, the same black car was waiting. This time, it felt like saying goodbye to an old friend when Raymond helped with her bag. "Back to real life, huh?" he said with a knowing smile. I guess so, she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what real life meant anymore. Where to? Dr. Carter asked as they settled into the back seat. Home, I suppose. Sophia glanced at her watch. I have the night shift tomorrow. Actually, he said, looking slightly hesitant, I wondered if you might join me for dinner first. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Sophia's heart skipped. Dinner? Nothing fancy, he assured her quickly. There's a small Italian place near the park. Good food, quiet enough to talk. The restaurant wasn't what Sophia expected. It wasn't the kind of exclusive, high-end establishment she imagined someone like Dr. Carter would frequent. Instead, it was warm and homey, with red-checkered tablecloths and photos of Italy on the walls. The owner greeted Dr. Carter by name and led them to a corner table. You come here often? Sophia asked after they'd ordered. Catherine and I had our first date here, he said, a small smile playing at his lips. Back when I was a broke medical resident and this was a splurge. I still come sometimes when I want to remember simpler days. Sophia tried to imagine him as a struggling resident before the wealth, before the prestigious career. It wasn't easy. What was she like? Sophia asked softly. Catherine? His eyes softened. Brilliant, stubborn, unfailingly kind. She was a pediatric surgeon, that's how we met. She would have loved what we did these past few days. There was pain in his voice, but also something else, a warmth, a tenderness that made Sophia realize how much he still loved his late wife. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. After a few bites, Dr. Carter set down his fork. I wanted to thank you for these past 3 days, he said. Your work was exceptional. I just did my job, Sophia replied, feeling her cheeks warm at the praise. No, he shook his head. You did far more than that. The way you connected with patients, how quickly you adapted to challenging conditions. It's rare, Sophia. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she focused on her pasta. Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss, he continued. I've been developing a new initiative through my foundation, mobile clinics that would bring healthcare to underserved communities year-round, not just occasional missions like this one. Sophia looked up, interested now. We'd start with 5 units serving rural areas within a few hours of the city, then expand based on need and resources. His eyes lit up as he talked, clearly passionate about the project. Each unit would have a full medical team, state-of-the-art equipment, and regular routes to build relationships with the communities. That sounds amazing, Sophia said sincerely. I'd like you to consider joining the initiative, he said, as our head nurse for the pilot program. Sophia nearly choked on her water. Me? But I'm just a regular staff nurse. Surely you need someone with more experience, more credentials. What I need, he interrupted gently, is someone with your heart, your adaptability, and your genuine connection with patients. The rest can be taught. Her mind raced. What would it involve exactly? You'd help design the program from the ground up, equipment needs, staffing, operational procedures. Once we launch, you'd oversee the nursing staff across all units and help train new teams as we expand. He paused. The salary would be substantial, more than double what you're making now. Double. Sophia tried not to let the number affect her thinking, but she couldn't help calculating what that would mean. Paying off her loans years earlier, helping Lisa through grad school, maybe even buying a small house someday instead of renting forever. I don't need an answer tonight, he added, seeing her overwhelmed expression. Take some time to think about it. It's a lot to process, she admitted. Of course, he smiled. But there's something else you should know. What's that? I've already spoken with your supervisor about the possibility. She said you'd be an immense loss to the hospital, but that she wouldn't stand in your way if this was what you wanted. Sophia blinked. You talked to my supervisor? Before asking me? I wanted to make sure it was possible before getting your hopes up, he explained. I hope that wasn't overstepping. Sophia wasn't sure how she felt. On one hand, it was presumptuous. On the other, it showed how serious he was about the offer. As Raymond drove her home later that evening, Sophia's thoughts swirled with possibilities. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been making her student loan payment. Now, she was considering a complete career change that could impact thousands of lives. When they pulled up to her apartment building, Dr. Carter walked her to the door. Think about it, he said. Take all the time you need. I will, she promised. Alone in her apartment, Sophia sat on her worn couch, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Her small living room with its second-hand furniture suddenly felt different, not because it was lacking, but because she was seeing it and her life through new eyes. 6 months later, Sophia stood in front of a shiny new mobile medical unit, watching as the final equipment was loaded inside. The white vehicle gleamed in the morning sunlight, the words Carter Foundation Mobile Health painted in blue along the side. Can you believe it? Lisa asked, snapping photos with her phone. My sister, the big shot director of nursing. Sophia laughed, still not entirely used to her new title. I'm just doing the same work, but with wheels. Yeah, right, Lisa nudged her. And a fancy office and a team of 20 nurses and a salary that finally got us both out of that tiny apartment. That was true. 3 months after accepting Dr. Carter's offer, Sophia had been able to put a down payment on a small 2-bedroom house where she and Lisa now lived. Her student loans were on track to be paid off within 2 years instead of 15. But the money wasn't what made her wake up excited every morning. Dr. Carter's here, Lisa whispered, nudging her again. Sophia turned to see him walking across the parking lot, talking with 2 of the program doctors. In the months they'd worked together developing the mobile clinic program, she'd gotten used to seeing him almost daily, yet there was still something slightly surreal about working so closely with someone she'd once viewed as an untouchable figure. Everything set for tomorrow? He asked, joining them. Just finished the final inventory check, Sophia confirmed. We're ready for our first official day. Tomorrow would be the launch of the program they'd spent months building, 5 fully equipped mobile clinics that would travel to 27 communities within a 3-hour radius of the city, providing consistent care to people who had previously fallen through the cracks of the healthcare system. Nervous? He asked with a knowing smile. A little, she admitted, but the good kind of nervous. You've got this, he assured her. The teams are well trained, the routes are planned, and you've thought of contingencies for every possible scenario. Almost every scenario, she corrected with a laugh. I'm still not sure what we'll do if we encounter another helicopter-phobic nurse. His eyes crinkled with amusement. We'll give her ginger candy and change her life. Lisa looked between them, confused. Inside joke, Sophia explained. After Lisa left to meet friends, Sophia and Dr. Carter, Alex, as she now called him, walked through the mobile unit one last time, checking that everything was in place for tomorrow's launch. Remember Lily? He asked suddenly as they finished their inspection. Sophia nodded, her heart tightening at the memory of the teenage girl from their last day in Pine Ridge. Any news? I got a call from her mother yesterday. The surgery was successful, and she's responding well to treatment. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. Relief washed over Sophia. That's wonderful. She might not have made it if we hadn't caught it when we did, he said quietly. 1 mobile clinic, 1 day in a small town. 1 life completely changed, Sophia finished. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both thinking about the ripple effects of those 3 days 6 months ago, not just for Lily, but for the dozens of other patients they'd treated, and now for the thousands more who would receive care through the mobile clinic program. I have something for you, Alex said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to her. Inside was a delicate silver pin in the shape of a caduceus, the medical symbol of intertwined snakes around a winged staff. It was beautiful, clearly antique. It was Catherine's, he explained. She wore it on her first day as chief of pediatric surgery. She always said it gave her courage when she doubted herself. Sophia looked up, stunned. Alex, I can't accept this. It should stay in your family. Catherine believed that objects carry energy from those who treasured them, he said, his voice gentle but firm. She would want it to go to someone who embodies what she valued most: compassion, dedication, and the courage to step into new challenges. With shaking fingers, Sophia pinned it to her lapel. Thank you. I'll treasure it. There's something else, he continued. The Foundation Board approved our proposal for the medical scholarship program. Sophia's eyes widened. This had been a project they'd worked on together, designing a scholarship for students from rural and underserved communities who committed to returning to practice in similar areas after graduation. Starting next fall, we'll fund 20 medical and nursing students each year, he said, clearly pleased. Full tuition, books, living expenses, everything they need to focus on their studies without crushing debt. That's incredible, Sophia braved, thinking of her own struggle with student loans. That will change so many lives. Like yours changed mine, he said quietly. Sophia looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? I'm the one whose life changed. Alex shook his head. Before those 3 days in Pine Ridge, I was just writing checks and making occasional appearances. Important work, but, he paused, searching for words. I was hiding behind my foundation, keeping my distance from the actual people we were helping. You reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. As they walked out into the fading daylight, Sophia thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a missed bus, a rainy night, an unexpected offer. How different her life would have been if any one of those elements had changed. Ready for tomorrow? Alex asked as they reached their cars. Sophia touched the silver pin at her collar and smiled. Absolutely. Looking back later, Sophia would recognize that those 3 days hadn't just changed her life. They had completely transformed how she saw the world, what she believed was possible, and most importantly, how she understood the true nature of wealth. True wealth, she now knew, wasn't measured in dollars, but in one's capacity to effect positive change. And by that measure, she had become extraordinarily rich.